Picture one of the biggest bands in America. Picture the man who wrote that band's most beautiful songs. Picture the voice singing those unmistakable harmonies on stage. Now picture this. Almost no one knows that man's name. The other members of his band became legends, their names written into rock history in gold. But the man who was the heart of that band, who wrote the most songs, who was even the wealthiest member, quietly slipped into the shadows of history. Why? Because at the very peak of his career, in the middle of the success everyone dreams of, he didn't board a plane. He walked away and he never came back. This is the story of Gene Clark, one of the founders of the Byrds. The man who left the flying band because he was afraid to fly. The man who created a masterpiece that no one heard. And the man who lived in the most painful way. What it truly means to be forgotten. If you've taken your seats and subscribed, we're beginning. A small town in Missouri, the year 1944. One of 13 children, Gene Clark was born into a modest, simple life. But there was something inside Gene. Music. He learned to play guitar at a young age and began writing songs. He played everything, from Hank Williams to the Everly Brothers. What beautiful taste and instincts he had, don't you think? His talent was so obvious that, while still young, he landed on the radar of a famous folk group, the New Christy Minstrels. But this wasn't Gene's real dream. In 1964, one day he watched the Beatles film A Hard Day's Night at the cinema. And in that moment, everything changed. He saw that light, that energy, and said, I have to do this too. His dream was big. He went to Los Angeles. There he met a few young musicians with similar dreams, Roger McGuinn, David Crosby, and together they formed a band. Yes, that band would be called the Byrds, and they would change the music world forever. In 1965, the Byrds exploded. They covered Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man, and it went to #1. They became America's answer to the Beatles. They created a genre called folk rock, and at the heart of this band, of course, was Gene Clark. Know this, almost all of the biggest songs they didn't adapt from Dylan were written by Gene. I'll Feel a Whole Lot Better, Set You Free This Time, 8 Miles High, and many more. Gene wrote them all. He was so prolific, writing so many songs, that thanks to his royalties, he became the wealthiest member of the band. While the others were still struggling for money, Gene's pockets were full, and he never had a single problem with money. But it was right here that the success began to turn into poison. The other members began to resent the money Gene was earning. Years later, they would admit it with maturity. Back then, they were very young and very ambitious. But returning to that moment, a crack was forming between them. And inside Gene, something was breaking too. Stage fright, anxiety, the weight of fame. This man who seemed to have everything from the outside was starting to fall apart on the inside. Let's say one thing clearly here. Gene battled anxiety and depression his whole life. Once again, we don't want to exploit this side of the story, but beneath his leavings, his escapes, there was always this invisible battle. And that battle broke out inside an airplane. The Byrds were at their peak. They had just recorded 8 Miles High, and even the title was ironic because Gene was terrified of flying. The band boarded a plane to go to New York. They were going to appear on an important television show. But as the plane waited on the runway, something snapped inside Gene. He began to tremble. He broke into a cold sweat. This plane is going to crash. I know it. I can't do this, he said. And he stood up and walked off the plane. His bandmate McGuinn later asked him about it. Gene said, "It wasn't just about the plane. It was more like a kind of nervous breakdown." Gene walking off that plane was, in truth, him walking away from the Byrds. The words McGuinn said to him became legend. If you can't fly, you can't be a bird. Wow. And just like that, the heart of one of the biggest bands in America, left the group at the very peak, with the band not even a third of the way into its journey. Think about it. Everything everyone dreams of was in his hands. Fame, money, success, all of it. And yet he left it all and walked back off that runway. Gene didn't stop writing after he left. Columbia Records signed him immediately as a solo artist because everyone knew he was a genius. And in 1974, he made the boldest work of his life, an album called No Other, far ahead of its time, magnificent and beautiful. But it was a commercial disaster. It sold almost nothing, and the world turned its back on him. How painful is that? The moment it became a commercial failure, the world turned away. We saw that same ingratitude most recently in The File on Jackson C. Frank. If you haven't watched it, you can find it on our channel. Years later, No Other would be declared a cult classic, remembered as a masterpiece. But in that moment, no one heard it. And it broke Gene a little more. Those of you who watched our Nick Drake series will remember this too. Such similar breakings, such similar battles. The Byrds were celebrated for decades, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, grew rich. But Gene stayed in the shadows. He spent his final years with health problems and struggles. He was still writing songs, but now there was no one to play them for. And in 1991, at 46 years old, he lost his life. While the band he founded became a legend, he left as an almost forgotten name. But we are here, and we say his name, Gene Clark. Listen to I'll Feel a Whole Lot Better, or No Other. You'll hear how beautiful that voice, those songs truly were. And maybe, just like us, you'll ask, how does a talent like this get forgotten? This was The File on Gene Clark, the story of a man who was afraid to fly, but could have flown the highest of all. In time, we'll surely dive into the depths of the Byrds too. If Gene's story touched you, share this video and say his name. And of course, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, because we need your support to keep these kinds of stories going. Thank you all for your contribution to making sure the ones who shouldn't be forgotten are not forgotten. We're so glad you're here.